All right, so when we're looking at our production graph right here, what we need to do is make sure we understand what it is. The first thing you need to understand is what's on each side. This is real GDP per person, and this is physical capital. What that means is, if I give you physical capital, tools, computers, hammers, trucks, you will be able to do what? Produce more real GDP. So if I start giving you tools, you'll produce more as we go up this graph. Now I give you even more, will you be able to produce more per person? No. Yes, you will. But we're going to start to have what as we move on?
Diminishing returns.
Diminishing returns, very good. As in I add more capital, but instead of going from here, well, let's say I want to add this much more capital, and I go from here to none, and I get a big gap like this, I start adding more capital up here, and I go, say I'm going to add that much capital again, but the actual gains is only going to be this big, which means I add more and more capital, but the problem with that is my returns will diminish. And eventually, as I add more capital from here to here, the amount of extra real GDP I get will be what? Well, not less, but well, little to eventually kind of none. So it means that you can add capital, and can you grow real GDP? Yes, which means one way to move long-run aggregate supply, as we said, as I make this go away, so we go back to here, how can I move our long-run aggregate supply? One way would be to do what? Well, add capital. Okay, so if I simply give more capital per worker, I can grow long-run aggregate supply, which short-run and demand could move with it similarly. However, when we look at communist countries, they would invest a lot in physical capital. Let's industrialize, build factories, get more tools. But because they didn't have a profit motive that capitalists or free market countries have, did their people have a big incentive to invent more, to make a big cutting edge stuff? No, they didn't. In fact, communist countries would take old, outdated equipment and factories and keep them in business. Because if they close that factory, what would happen to all the workers? They lose their jobs. Another communist society has to shuffle around and figure out where those jobs will go. So, communist countries would go ahead and keep adding more capital, and at the beginning, a lot of them could grow very quickly. But eventually, they're just adding more capital, and their growth starts to slow. Now, what you really want to be able to do in your production curve is you keep that growth going. So, if we have the, let's say, United States, and we have a physical capital curve like that, what would it take to keep growth going and keep long-run aggregate supply shifting in perpetuity? You say, wait, we could go ahead and add more capital from here to up here and then to here, but our gains are going to diminish, and we're going to basically run out of gains. What could we do to increase our production? Better technology is one. If we go ahead and get new technology to produce, we can go ahead and take the curve like this and shift it up. Ignore this part right here. Okay? Which means that for this much capital we were producing here, now with the same amount of capital, we're producing at a new location. And if we add newer technology, and by the way, is technology all computers and cell phones and software? Technology is simply what? New ways to produce them. Different management structures, different corporate structures, different sales techniques. Remember the whole thing we talked about to the package delivery, how they don't make left turns? That's technology. And you're like, well, they didn't invent anything. It doesn't matter. It's new ways. That profit motive keeps this growing. What's another way you could increase production per worker? Human capital. Things like education, skills, training, or even experience. Which means that I could give the same capital per person, and now they can produce up to here. Which means if I give you a profit motive to do better, learn more, Remember, if you have skills that are in high demand, what will a free market do?
Give you a job.
Not just give you a job, but
Advance you.
pay you more, right? As in you say, janitors typically don't make a lot of money. Why is that?
Because it's easily replaceable.
You're easier place. Almost everyone in here could be a janitor. Why do a lot of software developers get paid a lot of money? Because not a lot of people could go and make software. How many of you guys could be a decent janitor by the end of the week? Knowing how to clean and make, yeah, pretty much all of you. How many of you guys could design your own iPhone app by the end of the week? And there we go, okay? So those are the ways that you can increase production, and all of those things would start moving what? It would keep our long-run aggregate supply shifting. So those are kind of the goals that our economy wants to have, is keep producing more and keep expanding that long run. Because what does monetary policy do to long-run aggregate supply? What does it do? Nothing. It just can create inflation or deflation. Printing money doesn't move supply, it doesn't produce anything. Now, investment spending can move that capital goods up when we go back to here. So we say investment spending moves you from point here to point here because it can buy more capital goods. It can move long-run aggregate supply, but eventually that extra investment spending on capital goods will taper off. So it's not a good long-run approach, but it can shift it a little bit. And we also want to make sure we cover developing countries. Why has China in the last few decades been able to grow so much? They've been growing at 10% a year, where America grows at 2, 3. And when we're growing at 5% a year, everyone's like, hold on, guys, our economy is booming.
They're allowed to adopt the technology from other countries.
That's right. The technologies already exist that they don't have. When they're using a steel plow and can move to a tractor, does that mean China made a huge technological leap? Well, you would think no, because we've had tractors for 100 years. But for China, that is a big step from here to here. When instead of, using calculators and abacus, they all of a sudden have computers to do complex problems. Now that technology goes from here to here again. And it allows China to grow. Do they have to invent new things? No, they can say, hey, what do you guys have? They can add those new technologies and capital goods and grow very fast. However, as China grows and grows and starts getting higher and higher, what all of a sudden starts to happen?
Diminishing returns.
Well, it's going to be harder for them to find those new technologies, which means their growth will eventually start to do what?
Level out.
Slow down, as the new technologies they need will eventually have to become what?
New engine.
Invented. They'll have to be developed themselves if they want to grow. They can't just follow the leader. That's why developing countries can rise up. Basically, it's easier to catch up to the leaders than for leaders to gain a lot on the countries behind them. So that's your quick idea and theory about your production chart. Yes?
To cause a shift in the long run aggregate supply, is it just shifts in that curve, or can movement also cause it to shift?
Are you talking about this kind of movement?
Yeah, like on the curve rather than a shift.
Yes, because remember, this is real GDP. So anything that moves you up will move long-run aggregate supply. The keys to this is, in the long run, as you add capital and add capital and add capital, hey, look, we've been growing, right? But eventually you add capital, and what happened to our growth? And then we add capital, and so you can't do that in perpetuity. And that's kind of what the Soviet Union did. They added capital and added capital. They grew and they grew and they grew. But then 70s, 80s, and 90s, they're kind of growing from here to here to here, while America is going from here to here to here. And that's why the United States was able to still have a much higher standard of living, and the Soviet Union's theirs tapered off or maybe even declined as they put more goods into military spending. Okay? Do you have a question?
Yeah, it was the same as hers. So like movement along can shift the long run.
Yes, but it'll taper off. There is an end point, as in as you go from here to here, we had growth. From here to here, the amount of growth is negligible. You want to have sustained long-term growth year after year, decade after decade, you need technological shifts to move you up, or new educations, or training, and et cetera, et cetera. That's roughly your idea of how the production graph works. Any other questions on this? Well, very good then.